Shields up, Iron Breakers. Rurikhan here coming at you with another video, and today we're going to be talking about Outward. This is not going to be a review. This is my initial impressions on the title after about 5 or 6 hours of gameplay, and I haven't even left the starter area because I've just been focusing on learning the different mechanics that the game has in play, learning how to properly do the combat, playing around with the crafting system a little bit, and it's been very, very interesting. And this is actually a game that I've received quite a few requests from you guys in the comment sections to check out. But the interesting thing is I've actually been following this game a little bit on the low-key for quite some time, because I covered a previous game from this studio, which is God Factory. It's like this space battle type video game that I played in the past. And ever since then, I've been following one of the developers on Twitter. And whenever he talked about Outward, I would go and I would check it out and I'm like, this open world RPG, is this something for me? But I would always I would look at the footage and I would be like, I'm not sure if I'm going to enjoy this or not. I was always left a little bit hesitant, let's put it like that. So recently, this developer came up to me and he was like, hey, how would you like to check it out because you worked with us in the past and whatnot? And so he sent me a code on Steam and I was like, okay, let's go check this out and see what it's all about, since I've been getting so many requests about it. Anyway, and the first thing that I have to tell you right from the get-go, because I know that a lot of people will read the words open world RPG and they'll be like, oh, this is definitely for me. I'm going to play the crap out of this game, all that stuff. And let me tell you from the onset, this is not for everyone. And let me tell you something else, that is a good thing. Like I've said in the past about Sekiro, I don't particularly appreciate when games go super mainstream, and that is exactly what Outward is not, and that is something that I really like. Now, the reason I really like this is because when you step outside of the mainstream, it actually opens you up to doing a lot of really interesting mechanics that usually you can't put in a more mainstream title, because people will be like, oh, that's boring. Oh, this is dumb. Why can I fast travel? Why can I do all these things? And not every game is trying to achieve that, thankfully. And this is going to provide a much more niche experience to potentially a smaller audience. But at the same time, I believe that that smaller audience is going to enjoy this title a whole lot more. So they describe this game as an open world RPG. I would throw the word survival in there, like open world survival RPG, because there's quite a few survival elements at play here, like the temperature of the zones that you are in is important, because if it gets too cold, then you're going to receive stamina penalties. And if it gets too cold, you can actually catch a disease. Your character himself can catch a cold, and then you have to drink special teas. And even after you drink a special tea, it's not like, oh, you drank the tea, your cold is gone. No, it actually has a more realistic effect. Like, it has a lingering effect. Like, you drink the tea, it helps you, it starts receding the disease, but you still need to rest, you still need to drink lots of fluids for your character and stuff like that. And I find that little degree of realism to be a very interesting aspect of what this game provides. Now, a very important thing to keep in mind when you are looking at Outward, because I already know that a lot of people will look at it and they will see that, oh, these are not, current AAA generation graphics, whatever. And it's like, that's not the point of this title. I think that the visuals are pretty decent. One of the things that I do like is that even with, I'm assuming, a limited budget, they were still able to implement some really cool ragdoll physics for when you do kill your targets, particularly if you have big, beefy weapons. Like, they'll just be sent flailing after you kill them, and I kind of like that aspect. I mean, I don't mean exaggerated, but you can see the ragdoll in the kills, and I really appreciate that. I think that is a ton of fun. And it's even though the visuals aren't particularly impressive from a visual fidelity standpoint, I think they do a good job of presenting you with an interesting world to explore. And I'll tell you right now, I'm very interested in seeing a whole lot more of this game after 5 or 6 hours of playing. As a matter of fact, one of my first experiences was when I started learning about the combat, because here's the thing. When the game starts you off, and I think this was actually a really good way to start you off, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the starting of the game. There was this event at the very start of the game where you are thrown into a bit of a lousy situation. And basically you have to come up with 150 silver or find a way to earn a special favor with your tribe. Otherwise, they take away your house. Because you start the game and you have this house, which is like a lighthouse type situation. And that is where you have your stash. You have a bed that you can rest in, because it's also important for you to rest in as a survival mechanic. And that's kind of like one of the ways that they have of like, hey, you're in the game now, time to get the ball rolling. They're like, you got to pay this 150 or you're going to lose your house. I don't know what actually happens if you don't pay it up. I was able to acquire a tribal favor. But anyway, the interesting thing there is then you just kind of, you venture out into the world and you start trying to figure out how stuff works. So when you first engage in combat, you'll notice, wow, combat is a bit challenging. So you might want to think, okay, so before I engage in combat, I'm going to want to like find another way to make money potentially. So I'm looking around through all of the NPCs in the starter village trying to learn what I can do to make a buck. And one of the NPCs tells me, oh, I'll pay you good money if you can find me a mushroom that is shaped like a shield. And she gives you a generic location of where you can possibly find one. So it wasn't a dungeon. So I go into this dungeon, and that was the very first time that I went into the dungeon in the game. And I had just like, I found a spear somewhere, and I was using a spear because I was like, oh, I got a lot of distance with this spear, so that makes combat a little bit more safe, right? So I'm going through this dungeon, and I remember that it's been a while since I had played a game, and I had went into a dungeon, and I was actually scared of just about everything because stuff can kill you so easily at the start of the game before you actually know how the different systems work, right? And I was going through that dungeon, and I distinctly remember the point where I really started liking the game because I was like, I had killed a bunch of the easier enemies in that dungeon, right? And I had picked up the shield-shaped mushroom that I had to take back. I had done my quest, and but there was more to explore in the dungeon. And so I was killing the enemies and stuff, and then I find this one enemy that looks different from all the other ones. And I was like, what the hell is this? And I approached myself to kind of aggro it to see what he was going to do. He starts casting all kinds of spells at me, and I was like, no! And so that moment where you have to make that decision, right? Where you're low on resources, you're tired, you have everything you came for, and you have to make that call. Am I really going to risk everything for killing this one enemy? And the game, in this particular game, that is an actual decision that you have to make because it's not like, oh, if he kills me, I'll just respawn at the check. There's no checkpoints. Okay, whenever you actually die, there is a system that will run a scenario, which we'll talk about more later on. But basically, there's no going back in this game. There's no reloading a previous save. There's no set in stone death penalty. It's like a lot of shit can happen if you die. Like you can lose money, you can lose gear, there's real consequence for making that decision of whether or not I'm going to fight this particular enemy. And the weight of the decisions like that, I feel, is going to be something very important in the world of Outward. I know that you guys will probably be curious, so what did you do? I friggin' killed him, I'm an Ironbreaker, what did you expect? I killed him, and then I got some additional loot because there was like a treasure chest in the room where that monster was. And I got my goddamn loot. You damn right I did. He was healing himself with spells and stuff, and I went over there and I poked him with my spear until he died. And it felt real good, too. But that's just to give you guys like a small little story of I guess, when Outward kind of clicked for me. Ever since then, I've been playing it and I've been getting to grips with more of the systems. Personally, I don't intend to actually dabble in magic. When you begin the game, your character does not have any magical capabilities whatsoever. You actually need to go into a mountain and you got to do like some kind of quest in order to get magic, but that's not something I'm interested in. But the main focus point of Outward is that your character, he's not a hero. He's just a regular guy. And one of the really interesting mechanics that they put in place is like, you know how in most RPGs your character is carrying like, I don't know, probably like metric tons of loot all over with you because you just have like a massive inventory, or you have a stash or whatever. In this game, they actually do something very interesting, which is you need a backpack. And the backpack is kind of like a reflection of the type of character that you are. I mean, not necessarily, but kinda. It's a weird type of situation with that. But you need that backpack because your character is going to become overburdened with gear and loot and everything that you pick up in the world. Particularly if you're a hoarder like me, I tend to hoard everything in video games. Like, you're going to become overburdened really, really fast. So it becomes extremely important for you to figure out what is rare, what is not, what do I want to keep, what do I not want to keep. And as such, it becomes very, very important for you to have like a backpack that you can kind of carry with you, because the backpack expands your inventory, lets you carry more stuff. And here is where that interesting system that I was talking about comes into play, which is when you start the game, you can block attacks from enemies, or you can dodge roll, you can do all of these different things, right? But if you have your backpack on you, it's going to slow you down in combat, particularly when it comes to rolling. So one of the things that you can do if you're about to go into combat, you can actually take your backpack off and you can attack your enemies without your backpack. That means that you don't have access during that fight. You don't have access to your inventory because most of the stuff is in the backpack. There is a smaller inventory that you have in your character, but most of the stuff is in the backpack. And you can move faster and stuff, and then at the end of the fight, you go pick up your backpack again. I find that to be an interesting little detail because it does reflect the survival nature of the game. Now, one of the things that you need to keep in mind if you are planning on playing Outward is that I think a big chunk of your starting experience is going to be running from town to a place, and then from that place back to town. There's no easy way to track where your character is. They'll give you a map, and you can look for reference points. The map doesn't have like a marker of where you actually are. So you'll have to actually look for reference points and be like, okay, I see that thing. That thing is probably this thing on the map, which means that I'm probably here, and the place that I want to go is over there. So I'm going to adjust my direction in this general direction and go. And that's kind of how most of the game is. It's mostly about experimentation, about figuring stuff out, and a whole lot of survival. Your character is going to be required to eat, it is going to be required to sleep, and it is going to be required to drink. The way they implement these systems into the game is that the longer you are outside, the longer you are engaged in combat, and the more actions you perform, your stamina begins to dwindle. The amount of maximum stamina that you can have, and the only way to recover that is to sleep. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be like alchemical potions that you can have at some point that will recover your stamina and stuff like that. But at the point that I'm at right now, most of the ways that I have to deal with that is to actually, go back to town and sleep. But that's the thing. You don't have to go back to town. If you're able to, do your crafting along the way, if you're able to figure out how to properly use the systems in order to sleep outdoors, you can actually sleep outdoors. You don't have to go back. And that becomes the interesting part of the game because you're basically out there fighting against the elements. You're going to have to spend time repairing your gear whenever you set down to rest. You have to allot a certain amount of hours to repairing gear. You have to allot a certain amount of hours to guard duty to prevent you from being attacked by monsters while you are resting. And there's a lot of mechanics going around throughout the different systems of the game, and I find that to be the thing that is very interesting when you figure out how all of those kind of work together. As I was editing this video, I noticed that I forgot to mention the crafting system that is present in Outward, which allows you to essentially cook meals so that you can actually sustain your character. You can brew the teas that allow you to cure the different diseases. You can actually brew potions as well with an alchemical set. You can do healing potions, stuff like that. And you can even create your own gear by scavenging materials and finding recipes out in the world. And the really cool aspect of this crafting system is that you can go out and you can find the recipes, and the recipes will tell you you need these materials in order to do this thing, and then it shows up in the crafting system as another entry, and you just have to like click on there and you're like, okay, this is the thing that I want to craft. But you can also experiment with it. You can combine different ingredients and see if stuff just kind of works together. And, it is a little bit of a risk reward because sometimes you will put ingredients into something and, you just do like a bogus combination that actually doesn't work and you lose some of those materials. So you're going to get penalized. But if you actually find out like the formula to something, you will essentially be rewarded with, now you know how to do that thing. You don't actually need to go and buy the recipe or find it out in the world. And for instance, if I know the recipe of how to make healing potions, I can just tell you, here's the ingredients that you need in order to craft a healing potion, and you can just combine those ingredients together in the crafting system, and out comes a healing potion, and now you know how to do healing potions. And I like the experimental nature of this crafting system because a lot of times I find myself just trying to let me try to combine these two things together, see if that works out. I've discovered some meals that way. I've also done a whole lot of food waste that way. But, it is that whole aspect of experimentation. I realize that a lot of people will just be able to go online and research the recipes and be like, oh, I know exactly what I need to do, all of these things. But I think that it is worth that being a thing in favor of the people that actually want to experiment and discover this stuff for themselves, you know? Because again, it's more about you just experimenting and figuring stuff out. And I think that is what Outward is all about in its essence. Anyway, continuing with the video. So for instance, one of the things, and this was actually very surprising for me, was shortly after I started playing, as the days passed in game, it seemed like winter was coming, right? And a place that was basically like this lush green zone with a lot of grass and all of that stuff. Snow starts falling. The whole place shifts. The whole place looks like a snowy area for as long as you got this different weather of the snow falling. And I was just like blown away because it almost seems like you were in a completely different area, but you weren't. You were in the same area. It's just the environmental effects had changed the entirety of the look of the area. And I was just like, wow. That's the type of stuff that I like to see, because you might be like, oh, this game's not super impressive from a visual standpoint. And I'll go back and I'll say, yes, how many games have you seen that actually completely change an area just because it's been snowing in that area? You know, there's not that many games that take this level of immersion to it. And then those systems start coming into play, because it's not just the fact that now it's everything snowy. Now the whole area is colder, which means you need to wear warmer clothes. Or if you can't wear warmer clothes, because for instance, I don't have that much warm clothes, what you have to do is from time to time, you have to be close to like a fire or something to heat yourself back up. And that is something that actually works. So you can go up to a tree. You can get a bit of wood. You can set up a camp. You yourself, your character can just do it. You can go to a tree, pick up some wood, set up a camp, start a fire. And after you start that fire, you can warm yourself up. Or you can actually use that fire to cook something. You know, there's a million different things that you can do while you're out in the world. For instance, it was extremely cold one night, and I decided that I was going to try to sleep on the outside. So basically, I set up a campfire, and then I put my bedroll next to it so that my character would be warm throughout the night. Then when I woke up, my character was actually pretty well recovered. And those are the types of systems that you're going to have to figure out. Now, a lot of you guys are probably going to ask me, okay, Rurikhan, how about the combat? How does the combat feel? And I'm not super expert at the combat just yet. It's like I haven't really made up my mind if I like blocking or not. There's also skills that I haven't been able to acquire yet because they're super expensive, and I haven't gotten a good way to really generate revenue. But basically, it feels okay. It's not like super, mega, hyper, whatever, but the combat feels functional. Like I said, one of the things that I do like is the fact that enemies kind of ragdoll after you kill them. But one of the things that I also noticed is that it's very easy for someone to overthink the combat. Like, there's these enemies which look like these giant lobsters that fire lightning at you. And I remember constantly circling around them, circle strafing, trying to figure out what their weakness was. And I would die because they would basically keep attacking me and from a range, and they would hit me and I would eventually die. This one time I was like, well, screw it. I just went up to one of those and I just started spamming attacks, and he didn't even got one spell off. I was able to just kill it. So it's like, it's very easy to overthink the combat, and you know, sometimes it's going to be hard, sometimes it's not going to be hard. The thing is, there's no clear indicator of when a certain enemy is going to be particularly above your level. You just have to look at the enemy and you have to judge for yourself. Like, oh, this looks like he's going to be a tough guy. If he hits me, it's probably going to hurt. That's the only real analysis that you can do. And again, it brings back that whole sense of everything feels very organic. There's no like super number that defines, oh, this is how much level you have. When you kill stuff, you don't even gain experience. You just get the loot that they dropped. I don't even know what the system is like to get skill points. I know that I have 3 of them. I don't know how I acquired those skill points. And you use those, and then you use money, and you can ask different trainers to train you in different skills. Like I have a skill that I can use with one-handed axes that slows enemies down, for instance. But there are a whole lot of wide variety of skills and spells. Like I said, there's also magic, but everything is made from the position that your character is just a dude in the world. He's not a superhero. He's not super powerful. He needs to carry around a backpack because, you know, that's the only feasible way to carry around all that loot that you are carrying. And when you engage in a fight, you're going to have to put that backpack down. You're going to need light to light up dark places because otherwise you can't see. Being out at night is particularly dangerous because you can't see a damn thing. Enemies don't just, you know, de-aggro you. They're not like zoned. Like I remember at one point I aggroed 5 hyenas and they chased me because hyenas are fast. So they chased me all the way back to town. And the interesting thing is I went into town and then I came back the next day because I went to town, I went to sleep, and then I came back the next day. Those 5 hyenas were waiting for me outside. I was like, what the fuck? What is going on? The game actually has a system where stuff doesn't reset, I think, until like a week in game. So basically, say you go into a dungeon and you kill a bunch of people in that dungeon. They're not going to respawn for a week, an in-game week, like 7 days until they kind of repopulate the stuff in that dungeon. And I find that to be interesting because a lot of times you'll still be walking by corpses of people that you killed in the middle of the road. They're just like sitting there. So yeah, that's the kind of game, and I do think that it is a lot of fun, but at the same time, there is quite a bit of repetition, at least at the start. I personally feel that way because I find myself, okay, I'm going to explore in this direction. Now I got to go back to town to sleep. I'm going to explore in this other direction. Now I got to go back to town to sleep. You don't have to go back to town, but I'm a hoarder. You got to remember that. So it's like I pick up everything and I want to take it back with me back to town to my stash. But that's not necessarily the way that you have to play. If you do proper use of the crafting system and, you sleep outside instead of always sleeping in the comfort of your town, you can probably do a lot more progress than I have done, but that is going to be different play styles for different players. The other thing that I want to talk about is the death system. So whenever you die, you don't really die. It's a defeat. It's like a defeat scenario. So there's multiple scenarios that can happen in game for when you die. And for instance, one of the scenarios that can happen, and one of the more simplistic ones, is there's a hunter from your village who found you unconscious. He picked you back up, brought you back to the village, and you don't lose anything when that happens. I mean, you probably have to rest because your character is going to be malnourished, you're going to be thirsty, you might be sick, and you need to rest after that scenario. That's the only penalty that you receive. Whereas other times you might be in the middle of an enemy camp and you die in that enemy camp and they take you prisoner, and then you have to pick up your stuff and escape. That's like a different scenario. That was another scenario where they took me to some kind of a weird dungeon. There's a whole lot of different scenarios that can take place when you die, and I find that to be also very interesting because it keeps it's a more interesting prospect than I'll just reload my previous save. There's no reloading of previous saves unless you're manually copying your save over to a different folder and then manually replacing that save. That's your only way to do it, because the way the game is designed is that you're not supposed to have quick saves or anything like that. There's always going to be consequences for the choices that you make in game, and it's interesting. I think it's a very interesting game. I'm not super ready to really just be oh no, the game is fucking amazing, whatever. It's I'm excited to play it at this point with the little experience that I've had. As I play more, I might report back on this, but if you guys have been playing Outward, did this make you more curious about it? Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you're new here, subscribe, hit the bell notification icon, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Stay strong, and may your shields never break.